Welcome back everyone to the Advanced Squad Leader Training video series. This is your host, ID Jester. As you can see, I was getting some of the counters out that we'll be using later in this series when we do the Ranger Stronghold scenario. And I started to look at the map and the different terrain types, and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to talk about the different terrain types associated with ASL and go over some of the rules with them. I know terrain is section B of the rule book. Section B is kind of a lengthy chapter, about 40-45 pages, but it includes many different types of terrain. So study those different chapters, become familiar with the different types of terrain. Before you start a scenario in ASL, you should look over the different map boards and see if there's anything on the map board that you don't recognize, and be sure to read over that rule before you start your scenario so you're familiar with it. When we're talking about terrain, we're talking about section B of the rule book, and terrain is either going to have obstacles or they're going to be classified as hindrances. Obstacles are basically going to block line of sight. LOS is line of sight. Hindrances, on the other hand, are going to make your attack take a penalty for each hindrance that it goes through. If you ever get up to 6 or more hindrances between the firer and the target hex, then that attack is blocked by the hindrances. There is no line of sight if you ever get to 6 or more. If we look at our different kinds of units here, we can actually, in Vassal here, check line of sight as I talk about things. So that's one of the cool features. I would highly recommend everybody check out Vassal. It's a great engine to use, not only for ASL, but many other different kinds of games. We're talking about line of sight. Like I mentioned, we're talking about either something that's going to be an obstacle that's going to block your line of sight, or something that's going to be a hindrance. If we look at the building hexes, such as W9, W7 here, V8, T8, M9, these are all brown buildings. They are one single hex buildings. So these are going to be a one-story level wood building, which is going to give you a +2 TEM, which is a terrain effect modifier, which means if your units are located in V8 and they're attacked, your attacker is going to add 2 to their dice roll. If these buildings happen to be gray or dark grayish in color, then they would be stone buildings, and they would give you a +3 to your terrain effect modifiers. Buildings are an obstacle, which means that if I take my line of sight, you can see that I move into that hex, it's clear, but once I move beyond that hex, it is not clear. In ASL, you can see here's a good example. Anytime the actual depiction of the obstacle is crossed by your line of sight, then it is blocked. So it needs to actually touch your obstacle in most cases. Again, a lot of the things I cover are just basic overview, so you need to check on the rule book for any kind of restrictions or different options when they're talking about the different kinds of terrain. As you can see here, this line of sight between W10 and X7 is blocked by that building. So this is obviously not a valid line of sight. So buildings block line of sight, as well as woods hexes. So if we take our line of sight from V7 here and we go into V6, you can see it's okay. But once we go on beyond that, again we are blocked. So we have no line of sight beyond these woods from V7. Notice if we go down the hex spine though, and we're not touching the actual woods depiction on the hex, we are okay. We do have line of sight. So from V7 into T5, we can see that it is a clear, open line of sight. When we're talking about walls, which are gray depictions along the hex spines, the hex sides, these are walls, and there's also hedges, which are green depictions that go along the hex sides as well. These are half-level obstacles, and they will block line of sight if the target or the fire are not adjacent to the wall. So for example, from X7 to U8, if the target was in U8, they would get the wall bonus, but if I was shooting from U8 to X7, this unit would not receive any wall bonus. So the only time you receive the bonus is when the target is in the hex adjacent to it. If for some reason, if we look at this line of sight here, which is, let's try Y8 to S8, you notice it crosses the hex side of a wall, but neither the target nor the fire are adjacent to it, so line of sight is blocked between these two hexes. It would not be blocked between these two hexes because both the target and the fire are adjacent to it. In this case, again, target, fire, one of them is adjacent to the wall or hex. One of the things you can do, since hedges and walls are half-level obstacles, one of the things you can do is to actually get up to a different level. Half-level obstacles do not block line of sight to a different level unit. There, we'll say it that way. And we'll see that here shortly, more in depth. So hexes, or walls and hedges, are half-level obstacles. If the target or the fire are not adjacent to it, then line of sight is blocked. If either the target or the fire is adjacent to it, then line of sight is okay. Some of the other terrain on this map here that we're going to look at is hexes such as V7 here and U7 here. These are shell hole hexes. They are TEM of +1, and they have some uniqueness about them in that infantry can spend either 1 or 2 movement points to enter into the hex. If they spend 1 movement point, they're not actually going down into the little shell holes, so they don't get the bonus for moving. They're considered moving out in the open. If they spend 2 movement factors to move into the hex with shell holes, then they are actually going down into the little shell holes, and they would not receive the move in the open penalty for defensive fire. You can see on our map here that all of this green outlining text, such as U3, V3, V9, W10 is a light green in color, R9. This is a level 0. That's level 0, which is basically the level ground the scenario starts on. The light brown in this case, O9, P8, P7, Q7, R6, that is going to be considered level 1. 08, 07, 06, P3, Q3. All of this medium shade of brown is level 2. And Q6, P5, O5, N5, and M5, this dark brown, is considered level 3. So the green is level 0. The light brown is level 1. The medium brown is level 2. And the dark brown is level 3. When we start talking about going up and down hills and how that affects line of sight and everything, I actually want to, I created a couple sheets for different squad level game a couple years ago, but the same basic rules apply to ASL, so I just thought it would be easier to go over that visually because it represents three-dimensional. Alright, so here we go. We all know that units at the same height can see each other as long as there isn't any obstacles in the way, or there isn't more than 6 or more hindrances in your line of sight. So if you're at the same level, there's no obstacles in your way, you have line of sight to one another as long as there's not 6 or more hindrances in your line of sight. If your line of sight, if you can see a unit, then they can see you as well. I like to call that the see you, see me rule, where if one unit can see it, then the other unit can see it back. But sometimes things get in your way, and you can't see the enemy. That will include any kind of obstacles, such as walls, hedges, buildings, woods, etc., etc. One way to fix that problem is to get a little higher. That way you can see over the blocking terrain and then spot the enemy. Remember, our walls and hedges are only half-level obstacles. If you are at a higher level than the half-level obstacle, you basically can see right over them, even if a unit is right behind the wall. In our example, the German squad climbed up the hill to see over the wall. If this is a hedge, it'd be the exact same thing. And you can see that half-level obstacle has no bearing on whether or not he can see a unit that is 3 hexes away or the unit that's 4 hexes away. If he was not at a level 1 hex, just like this, and there was no one that was adjacent to the wall, either a target or the firer, then neither one can see each other. But once you go up in height, you must be careful because of what I call the Grand Canyon effect. Basically, that means if you're not on the edge of a higher terrain, you can't see down. What do I mean by the Grand Canyon effect? Well, maybe my little story will stick with you and you'll be able to remember that. A couple years ago, me and the wife decided to go see the Grand Canyon. And so we went and we drove up to the little building there. We paid our money. We walked out of the building and I can't freaking see the Grand Canyon anywhere. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. We came all this way. Where is this thing? You cannot see it until you go right up, walk down the little path until you get to the edge of the Grand Canyon. You can't actually see down into the Grand Canyon. You can't actually see that there's a 5-mile wide hole in the ground. You can see the buildings on the other side, but you can't actually see there's a hole in the ground until you walk right up there. So I call that the Grand Canyon effect because I always think about that. Here I am 100 meters away from this humongous hole in the ground and I can't see it because I'm not at the edge. So hopefully you'll be able to remember that. Here's a little depiction down here at the bottom of our sheet talking about we got a unit up here at a level 1 hill. It's not on the edge, so it can't see down, just like me in the Grand Canyon. I can't see down because I'm not at the edge. And also, the only thing you can see is straight across. So if you're at level 1 hill here, you could see, 5 miles out another level 1 hill, as long as there's no intervening obstacles that are going to block your line of sight. But you can't actually see down unless you're adjacent. Alright, but when you go up in height, that means you can avoid all the lower level blocking terrain, including bouquets, woods, walls, crops, level 1 buildings, anything else that's level 1 or lower. So if I'm at level 1, basically anything that's at level 1 or lower, I can see right over. Whether that's a woods hex, a building, our walls, which are half level. Again, it's just like me at the Grand Canyon. I can see somebody standing at the other side if we're both at the same height across the Grand Canyon. Nothing is going to be higher than that, so I can see over it. It might help you to think of terrain in height level as building blocks. If you're standing on a block that's higher than all the other blocks, you can see past it. So here we are. We have a German squad here, 467, on a level 3 hill. We have a level 1 hill with level 1 woods. Their total height is 2. Here we have a level 2 hill. It's a level 2 total. We have a level 1 hill with a half level wall. Its totals 1.5. And we have a level 2 hill over here. We have line of sight between these because I can see over everything in between me and my target hex. Problem is, when you start getting up high, the next thing we're going to talk about is everyone's worst nightmare, blind spots. Or in the ASL world, we call them blind hexes. So what's a blind hex? So if you start going up height, somebody can hide behind some of these buildings or level obstacles, and you will not be able to see you. So I actually created another document talking about blind hexes here. It's the blind leading the blind. One of the major problems that arise when you get higher is creating blind hexes behind obstacles. The area of the shadow behind the obstacle is called blind hexes, and it is blocked from line of sight. Half-level blocking terrain such as wall and hedges never create blind hexes to units at a higher level. I don't know why I couldn't say that way earlier, but that's what happens when you do live video. Blind hex rules are Section A, Rules 6.4. Look up that section, review it, read it, but hopefully some of the stuff I'll cover will sink into you here. First thing we have here is we have a unit up here in a level 2 hill. We have a level 1 house, and we possibility of creating a blind hex for units that are hiding behind the house. Blind hexes out of line of sight. How do we know how many hexes are blind? How do we know there is a blind hex created? Well, there's kind of a process you use to do that. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to find the range. And when we're talking about range, one of the most important rules to keep in mind when dealing with blind hexes is that you don't find the range between the fire and the target union, but instead you find the range between the fire and the blocking terrain. So in this case, we have our German squad up on a level 2 hill. 3 hexes away is a level 1 house. That is the correct range we're going to look at, which is range 3. Range 6 is wrong. We're not actually looking at the range to our enemies. We're looking at the range to the target's obstacle. Second, so once we have the range, second, what we're going to do is we're going to find the difference in height between the spotting unit's height and the total height of the blocking unit. So in this case, our squad is up at level 2 hill. We have a level 1 house. This is at level 2. The house is level 1. The height differential is 1. So we have a range of 3. We have our height of 1. It is worth noting that when you're adding the total, totaling the height, you're going to add in the total height of the blocking terrain and not just the height of the level of the terrain. So for example, if we have a level 3 hill here, we know that it's going to be total height of 3. Level 1 hill, level 1 hill, level 1 hill, level 1 hill, all these are level 1 hills. Our height, our obstacle here, is our woods, which is also a level 1 obstacle. So our total difference here is a level 1 hill. Our woods height is a level 1. Our firing unit is at level 3. Our total height is level 2. The difference between these two, total height of 3, total height of 2. Our total difference is 1. 1, 1, 1. So that means when we look at our little chart here, in this example our range was 4 hexes. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes between the firer, which is the German unit, and the blocking terrain. Actually, that's a typo, my bad. Actually, there's 3 hexes between the firer and the blocking terrain. 1, 2, 3 hexes. Typo, my bad. 3 hexes between the firer and the blocking terrain, and the total height difference between the firer and blocking terrain was 1. This means that in our example there is 1 blind hex created. So in this example here, up at level 3, we have our hill at level 1. We have our woods, which is a level 1 height. Our total height difference is 1. 3 minus 2 is 1. And we're going to create 1 blind hex. There are multiple different rules when we're talking about how many hexes are created for blind hexes. Section 6.41, for every multiple of 5 hexes to a full level obstacle, you're going to increase the number of blind hexes created by that obstacle by 1. So for example, if our unit here was, another 5 hexes way over here, you could see that our line of sight is going to elongate the line of sight. It's going to elongate it, and it's going to create a longer blind hex. So that was going to create more blind hexes. So for every 5 hexes, you're basically going to add 1 extra blind hex. So in this case, if our obstacle was 10 hexes away as opposed to 3 hexes away, it's going to actually be a blind hex added multiple of 5, which is going to be 2. Now, section 6.42, for every full level elevation advantage greater than 1 level over an obstacle, decrease the number of blind hexes created by that obstacle by 1 to a minimum of 1. So what that means basically is, what that represents is, if this guy was even higher up, you can see that he's going to get a steeper angle. Oops. A steeper angle, and it's going to create less blind hexes possibly. Less blind hexes, obviously, if you're going to be higher up. And of course, the opposite of that is if you're farther away, your line of sight's got to go out, it's going to stretch longer, it's going to create more blind hexes. So 6.41 and 6.42. One other thing of note, try and put this back where it should have been, so you can see this next example here. Section 6.43, the number of blind hexes created by an obstacle can be changed by the height of the hexes directly behind the obstacle along the line of sight. If the hex behind the obstacle is at a lower level than the elevation of the hex containing the obstacle, the difference in elevation between these two hexes is added to the number of blind hexes which are created. As you can see here from our example, we're 3 hexes away to our obstacle between the fire and the obstacle. Total height difference between them is going to be 1. Now you can quickly and easily see if these hexes here, if I can get these things selected without, I might have to just move it out of the way for a second here. Okay, notice that if our level 1 hills weren't a level 1 hill anymore and it was just a level 0 hill, or we were at level 0 terrain, you can quickly and easily see that this his line of sight is actually going to elongate. So we're actually going to, here we have a height differential of 1. From 0 to level 1 is a height differential of 1. That means that instead of creating 1 blind hex, we're going to create 2 blind hexes, which you can see in my little diagram here, hopefully. So instead of having just the one blind hex because of the same level height, which I can't change right now. Okay. Instead of having 1 blind hex because of the same level height, if our height is lower, we simply are going to add in the difference between our obstacle height and our target height. The difference is 0 to 1 is 1. We're just going to add that to the blind hexes, and you can quickly see that definitely it's going to create 2 blind hexes just because there's more room for his line of sight to go. It kind of elongates his line of sight. So hopefully between my little 2 sheets here, we talked about the difference of height, what they can do, how blind hexes are created. Look at your multiples of 5 hexes. You're going to increase by 1 the number of blind hexes created for every multiple. So if we got 10 hexes, okay, for every multiple 1, we're going to increase it by 1. When we're talking about height advantage, obviously, if our unit has a severe height advantage, its line of sight is going to be way more elongated down. So I might actually be able to see right over those height, right over the obstacle, depending on its height. If it's different in terrain, if you have lower level terrain than you do of the obstacle hex, if you have a lower level terrain, you're actually going to add that in because, as you see, it's going to be harder for them to see the units behind because they're at a lower level, which makes sense. So back to our vassal here. I hope I really wanted to look at it 3-dimensionally because I think it makes a little bit more sense, because when you look at it 2-dimensionally, when we're talking about it in vassal, it makes it a little more complicated if you don't have these thoughts in mind. So for example, if we have line of sight here, M6, and line of sight here, but M6 here, can M6 see K6? This will be just some test questions for you to see if you recognize it. M6, K6, are these two within line of sight of one another? Obviously not. Remember our Grand Canyon effect. Unless you're actually on the edge, you can't see down into the canyon. Anytime you're looking down, can't see down. Obviously, if we have a hex like N4 and O6, these two hexes, can these two hexes see one another here? N4 and O6. Well, that's an easy one. Of course they can't. We got a higher level hill between them, So they can't see each other at all. How about let's see here. I'm just looking at a couple good examples. What happens if we have something like P3 and R4? P3 and R4. Can those two see each other? Can they see one another? Well, if you remember, they cannot see one another. The reason they cannot see one another is we have a level 2 height here. We have a level 2 height here, which is level 1 for the hill, level 1 for the woods, which makes it level 2. So level 2 to level 2, I can't see beyond it, down into the hole, because of the Grand Canyon effect. Can't see down in the hole because I'm not at the edge. And even though this is an actual edge of a hill, this height is just as high. So we're looking out just like back here. Okay. In our case, we're looking at level. Let's see. Did I? Nope. I don't think I have that. Let me check this other one real quick. Nope. Okay. In this case, I'll just lower this one down so we can see it. Alright, let's say this is a level 2 hill. Okay, we have a level 1 hill with our level 1 woods, which is also level 2. We can't see anything beyond it down in the hole. All we can see is along our level. Just like this here. Level 1 woods. Can't see down. This is right here is the one example actually I wanted to give you. Instead of level 1, we're actually dealing with level 2 in our vassal controls here. Level 2, I can't see down into level 1. Let's look at CC8, way back here in the corner, and R2. CC8, right down this line to R2. Do these two have line of sight? A lot of stuff in between them. Do these two see each other? Well, let's just line it up and see. Oh, absolutely they do. Because we have a level 2 here, we have a level 2 here, and nothing between them is higher than level 2. So as long as nothing is higher between them, they have line of sight. What about this hex? Oops. Let's do CC6 and S. Let's go to T6. T6 and CC6. So CC6, let's stretch it out. T6, yep. Again, level 2. So everything looks fine there. What about CC6 up to Q6? This is level 3 here. This is level 2 here. Can they see one another? Well, let's draw it out and see. Yep. We're looking up. They're looking down at us. There's nothing in between that's either higher or than that. So we have line of sight. For our scenario purposes, these dark brown lines here represent cliff sides, and there's some special rules with cliff sides. And there's some units that can't fire adjacent up a cliffside, and there's some units that can't fire adjacent down a cliffside. So read that section over. If our tank in this scenario at U6 could not target someone in T6 because he can't get his turret up high enough to actually shoot at this unit. So there's a few kind of restrictions on cliffsides. The only way infantry can climb up a cliffside is through climbing. I don't foresee that happening in this scenario, but you never know what might happen. Let's see, is there any other terrain that I was going to look at? Maybe we'll look at a couple more examples of our terrain here and see if we can get some line of sight. Let's see here. What about 06? 06 right here. Say we got a guy over here at M9. Can we shoot at him? M9, 06. Alright, same thing. You see, as soon as it goes off that hill, it turns blue because we're not at the edge. It's one of the most important things to remember is you can't see anything when you're not on the edge. If something happens to be the same height as you, you can't see it. Just like my story about the Grand Canyon. Let's see, there was a couple other ones that I've written down that were kind of interesting. V8 to R7. Let's see, where's V8? R7. Okay, so did it again. V8 here, R7 here. You can see they do have a line of sight. Doesn't touch the buildings. One of them, either the target or the firer, is adjacent to the wall hex here. This happens to be the target hex. He'll get the bonus for being in the building and not the wall. That's, of course, he's bypassing it. He's not actually in the building hex. If he's bypassing it, then he would get the wall bonus. Let's see. What were some of the other interesting... Alright, let's do a couple more just to see if everybody understands our different height levels here. If we're looking at H3 and we're trying to fire over here to L2, H3, L2, can he see L2 to fire on somebody? Well, let's take a look. Nope. Again, this is level 1 hill plus the actual woods, which is level 1. So this is a level 2. The medium brown is level 2, so it blocks his line of sight because he can't see down past it. Let's see. Let's look at let's see. Let's look at X2. X2. Can it see into T6? X2 into T6. Well, let's see what happens here. Let's stretch it out. Yep, he can. Notice this woods doesn't come into play because of the blind hexes we talked about earlier. The blind hex, I believe, would be V4 here. If we try, we try from V4 up there. Yep. See how we get blind hex? If we were firing from up here down into V4, it's going to be blocked because of this level 1 obstacle. It's going to create one blind hex in there. So can T6, can we see into V4? I'm sorry, W4. Sorry, W4. T6, W4. Well, let's take a look. Look at that. We can. At blind hex, we can't, but we can see somebody here. It'll be getting really interesting when we start talking about bypass mode, because again, in bypass mode, if I'm bypassing these, let's say these two hex spines, W3 and W4, and V3 and V4, if I'm bypassing these two hex spines and I'm right here, you notice that from T6 we do have line of sight to that spot right there. But if I then end up in V4, I'm in the blind hex behind the trees. Guy up in T6 cannot see me. Let's look at U4 and W8. Can I see W8? Well, let's take a looky. Nope. The reason is it hits this, which is going to create a 1 hex. It's going to create a 1 hex blind spot, which would be here. If you see that, it's blocked by that. But it also touches the building hex, so the building hex also creates a 1 blind spot as well. So I believe it's going to touch this building, possibly hit this corner and create a blind hex over here as well. Let's see if that happens. Oh, nope, it misses the building. So in this case, we don't have any line of sight issue between U4 and X7. I know blind spots and line of sight from different heights took me a long time to try to understand and talk with many people and read the rules over and over again, post messages and everything, and not just for ASL but in many other different tactical infantry games. And so I'm trying to cover that pretty in depth for those people that are new to ASL and possibly not sure of what the rules are. Let's look at D4 and D4 and G5. D4 right here in this building hex, out here into G5. D4 to G5. Well, let's string it up and see what we see. Nope. Remember, we have a wall. We're both at level 0. Both at level 0. So if the target or the firer is not adjacent to where the line of sight crosses the wall, we can't see one another. So units in D4 and G5 cannot see one another. What about D6 and F4? Now this is kind of an interesting one because it actually goes through two wall sides here. D6, it's going to cross there, and then it's going to cross again, and it's going to go to F4. Well, let's take a look. Nope. Because it crosses this first wall side here, the unit would have to be in this hex, E5, to be hit. Since it crosses another wall side, and the unit's here, it's not in that hex where it crosses the wall first. Can't see one another. No line of sight. That was a good one to find, because that was kind of tricky for those of you who weren't sure about that. I wasn't even 100%. I'm still not 100% sure. Let's look at U8. U8 right here with the shell holes, and W8. It kind of goes along the wall hex spine there. U8 to W8. Yep, we certainly do. You can shoot along the wall there. You can even extend that out to all the way out to V8. I'm sorry, Y8. It's hard to read them upside down. Sorry. U8 to Y8 does have line of sight. See if I can find a couple more good ones here that might some tricky little line of sight things. I'm sure there's some people out there going, yes, this is really good, and other people going, no, I understand all this. But for these people who are new to ASL, always going over these line of sight issues is always a good thing. Let's look at B7 and D4. Somebody in B7 shooting at somebody in B4. Is that a possibility? Well, let's take a look. Yep, certainly is. Notice it doesn't touch the terrain art, so you don't have to worry about that. Clear hex, clear hex. Hits the wall hex side, but I'm adjacent to it. So no problem there. I would get a +2 to your attack because of the wood building. +2. Speaking of terrain effect modifiers, we're talking about them. C4 here, shooting at somebody in C7. C4 to C7. Obviously that's clear line of sight. Woods are +1 TEM. So you're going to add 1 to your attack when you're shooting at somebody in the woods. Obviously they have to actually be in the woods. So if somebody is coming along the B7 C7 hex spine and bypassing it and going along the B6 C7 hex spine, and you shoot at them there, then they would not get the bonus of being in the woods because they're in bypass mode. In bypass mode, you are bypassing whatever terrain is in that hex. So you would get a -1 to your attack on them for them moving in the open. And you would also get, more than likely, a non-assault move bonus, which is another -1. Let's see if I can find any more interesting ones here. How about 05? We're going to look at J4, 05. Okay, 05, J4, yep, they're both level 3, so that's not a problem. How about 05? How about 05 to Q2, right there? 05 to Q2. Can you see that guy coming up the hill at him? Well, let's take a looky, shall we? Yep. See that guy coming up the hill at him. No problem. How about P4? No, let's try this one. Q5 to U5. Q5 here and U5 over there. Right there. Well, let's take a looky. Nope. We got a level 2 obstacle in our way. We're at level 2. We can't see anything beyond it. So, can't see one another from U5 and Q5. I'm trying to see if there's any other terrain that I might have missed. We got the shell holes we talked about. We got the walls and hedges. We got the buildings. We got the woods. And of course, especially for this scenario, this is going to be very height intensive. Level 0, the green. Level 1, the light brown. Level 2, the medium brown. And level 3 is the dark brown. So understanding height and blind spots, what you can see and what you can't see, very, very important, not only for this scenario, but in ASL in general. I'm trying to see if there's any other interesting line of sights that might crop up here or there that, oops, clicked on the wrong button, that might pop up for our scenario. Well, I can't see anything right off the top of my head, but maybe we'll get into it more. Here are the units that are going to be participating. For those of you who have watched some of the previous videos, I'm hoping to do a actual step-by-step replay of the Ranger Stronghold scenario. These are the units that will be participating in it. We have 5 American squads, some bazookas, a couple leaders, and a couple medium machine guns. And, oh, don't forget your half squad. About 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 full squads, 4 leaders, 4 light machine guns, a medium machine gun, and 2 armored fighting vehicles. So, should be kind of interesting to see how everything plays out. Lots of different things to play with. We have some machine guns, we have some bazookas, we have some vehicles. Of course, our sniper counters. In this case, the German sniper numbers are 2, the American sniper numbers are 4. So, I thought when I was getting these counters out and going over some of the line of sight and the different terrain to make sure I'm familiar with the terrain. Again, if you're playing a scenario, you're not sure of what the terrain is, ask your opponent or look it up in the rule book, talk it over, make sure you understand what the rules are. It's nothing worse than getting halfway through a scenario and thinking you can do something and not be able to do it because you don't understand the actual scenario or the actual terrain penalty that's associated with that different kind of terrain. Again, when we're talking about different kinds of terrain, either obstacles which block line of sight or hindrances. The only hindrance we actually have on this map is the crops, and the crops are only a hindrance when they're in season. So if somebody in let's say C1 was going to fire at G1 and the crops were in season, they actually can see one another. Oop, let's go back in our line of sight here, and they can actually see one another, but you notice it's in red, which means there's a hindrance there between the two. Hindrance, so you would add +1 for each hindrance of crop, and you would add +2 for the wood building. So if C1 was attacking someone in G1, you would actually add +3 for just TEM, terrain effect modifiers. Hindrances are accumulative, so as long as your line of sight touches that hindrance, you could add them up to and including 5, but once you include 6 hindrances, the line of sight is just too obscured and you don't have line of sight. Well, I think that covers pretty much all the terrain that's on this map board anyways. There's lots of other different ones in there. As usual, if I missed something or if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post after you watch the video. I would recommend that you look through section B of the rule book and cover some of the exceptions I didn't cover, some of the strange rules that might be associated with some of the terrain I talked about. Hopefully some of my diagram examples about how you see three-dimensionally it makes a little bit more sense to you. Level 1 obstacles or half-level obstacles you can see over. If you're up higher than them, you can't see anything down unless you're at adjacent to the lower level hex. Cannot see down. As long as nothing is higher than the target and the fire, they can see one another. And as long as their total height is not higher than the unit that's shooting and the unit that's the target, they should see each other fine. Thing you can worry about is when you're talking about different height, it's talking about blind hexes, which are created behind obstacles. You're going to find the range between the person that fires and the obstacle. You're going to find the total height differential between them, between the firer and the total height of the blocking terrain. For each level, for each multiple of 5 hexes, you're going to add 1 to the blind hexes created. If the target or the firer is higher level than the obstacle, it can reduce the number of blind hexes by 1 to a minimum of 1. And of course, if there's a height differential between the unit behind the obstacle and the obstacle height, then that is going to actually add more blind hexes to the attack. So hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully I covered some of the things that maybe you didn't realize or didn't know. And as always, I'll try to do better next time. This is ID Jester, signing off.